if you can, almost like take a step back and look at it, if we had enough planes that were just flying, it would almost be more of like an air gondola, rather like a ski lift, rather than like your typical flight where you get assigned a seat and you get assigned a time, where it's basically you just show up and you just know it's either green or red. You can either show up and there's going to be space available or there's not space available, and you just can hop on a plane and go. That's the ultimate vision.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Our mission is to show the many paths to net zero for an industry that is one of the hardest to decarbonize. So every week we speak with airline, airport, travel, and technology executives to help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you're a frequent flyer, an airline executive, if you care about sustainability, or just love traveling, welcome aboard. This is a show by Simpliflying, who have been helping build trust in travel for over 15 years. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Cirium, which is empowering the global aviation industry to reach a more sustainable future with the most accurate aircraft emissions data. The show is also supported by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simpliflying.
Adam Goldstein is a visionary who is building pretty much the Tesla of the air. With Archer, one of the leading eVTOL companies, who already has a deal with United to fly these eVTOLs from Newark Airport to Manhattan. There are multiple city pairs and cities he's looking to enter, and this is one of the most exciting conversations I've had on this podcast. Enjoy. Adam, you've recently announced Midnight. Let's dive right into it. Tell us, what exactly is Midnight and what might the passenger experience be like?
So we're building electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and they're really to be used in urban environments. And so if you can imagine the trips that you've been taking in your car that take you 60, 90, 120 minutes sitting in traffic, and you could now fly to your destination in 5 or 10 minutes. These are vehicles that will change the way people move, but also allow people really to just get a lot of time back and to do more with it. And so Midnight is the vehicle that we are manufacturing, producing, and certifying, and we'll have operating here in 2025. And so it's a very exciting time in the industry as all the technology has matured. The regulators are all lined up to certify these vehicles, and there's finally enough capital to actually get it done.
I know we will talk about capital shortly, but I believe you have a deal now with United where you will be flying United passengers from Newark to Manhattan or from even JFK to Manhattan. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have a pretty large agreement with United, and it covers a lot of different areas. United's an investor, they're a partner, and they're buying aircraft. And so they've been with us, for a good part of the journey. And, United has made it really clear that it's very important to them to bring sustainable forms of aviation to market. So I think that's a big part of like what they're trying to do. And we really help them fulfill that mission. And so they partner with us early because we have a vehicle that has a really straightforward path to get certified and get to market, and can serve a lot of their best customers in their big hubs. And so Manhattan to Newark Liberty International is a really great example. That's one of those routes that is really only around 15 miles, but takes you 60, 90 minutes to get through. If you got to go through one of the tunnels going to or from the city, it can be, an unbelievable journey and very frustrating. And so that's a route that we're really excited to announce. And we're working with United on many more routes that are similar to that across their other hubs, where we bring in all the different local municipalities and different partners that are involved to getting that done. So if you can imagine, we don't just announce a route like Newark to Manhattan. We worked with Mayor Adams and his office and the Port Authority and a bunch of different groups because there's a lot of constituents that are involved that we want to make sure understand the product and understand the value we'll deliver, while also at the same time increasing safety from the way people get to the airports today.
Right. So paint me a picture, please, if you may. If I fly in, let's say, from London to Newark, I can imagine it takes off from Newark at a heliport or something like that, or at the airport. Where do I land in Manhattan if I want to be near Port Authority or Penn Station?
Yeah, so we've actually been working with United in site selection at Newark and finding, the places, and we're really thinking through the full customer journey. So when you land at Newark, we want to make sure you have a low friction experience where you can get off your plane. It's very easy to go find the what we call vertiport, or people refer to as skyport, that will allow you to now take off and go right to Manhattan. So the whole journey needs to be considered in saving you time, not just the actual flight itself. So we're working really closely with United on that. So you can imagine your plane lands, you pull up to the gate, you get off. There's another gate very nearby. You go down and you get into another plane, and that plane takes off and takes you back to Manhattan. So there are already existing heliports in Manhattan. There's, the Blade West Side heliport. There's one on the east side, and there's also one down in the Wall Street area. And so the first one that we have worked on is the one that's downtown in the Wall Street area. And, it'll service a decent portion of the city. And so we will look to expand into multiple areas from using existing infrastructure, but then also work on future infrastructure points, which we will have to build. And we will have to partner in order to give access to a lot more folks, a lot more New Yorkers, so this can become, a relatively common use product.
Would these heliports that you build or vertiports that you build be owned by you and operated by you, or how would you be involved at all?
It depends on the area that we're operating, but if you take a place like Manhattan, the answer is almost certainly no. So in Manhattan, the heliports are typically owned by like the Economic Development Councils, so like an EDC, or it could be owned by some type of a conservatory with some piece of land. But if you think about another place that might be less constrained, like let's say a place like Miami, there's a lot more opportunities to actually own the infrastructure. That being said, we will likely partner. We won't likely own the infrastructure. So there's a lot of great companies out there that are looking at the infrastructure that will help finance it and put it in place. And so I think there's a range of options of what these pieces of infrastructure can look like. It can be, we call it like a bus stop, where it's a very, the only thing you really need is charging. Something that, kind of scales all the way up to, a megaport like Uber had shown in their Uber Elevate designs, where there's these beautiful designs that have retail and a full customer experience. So I think it'll really run the gamut for what people will get to experience.
Very, very interesting how you're thinking end-to-end infrastructure, not just the flight. But let's talk about the flight for a minute. I know, for example, there are some helicopter services right now from JFK to Manhattan, from New York to Manhattan, but they're pretty much limited to first-class passengers or business class premium passengers for Delta and United, for example. Who will be flying these planes? How many people can each aircraft carry, and what will it cost?
Yeah. So it's funny, Rob Weisenthal from Blade jokingly says, there's 3 reasons why you can't scale helicopters in Manhattan, and it's noise, noise, and noise. And so the challenge is, there's limited supply. And so you cannot put multiple aircraft in the air because it just makes too much noise. It disturbs the communities. But the beauty about eVTOL is that these aircraft are actually very quiet. And so it's a completely different noise profile. And you basically won't be able to hear the noise on the ground, as it will just blend in to the background of what you would hear on the ground. So that allows us to put more aircraft in the air. So I think that gives us an opportunity here to service more than just the ultra, sort of high net worth folks, and actually start to, offer a product that can be more equitable and can give more exposure because there's a lot more of them. And then the second reason is these vehicles are much less complex than helicopters. We use a lot less parts. The maintenance is much less. And so we can drive the cost of these vehicles down. So not only are they lower cost, but we can actually utilize them more because they're not being maintenance so heavily, which means we can spread the fixed cost over a greater user base, which will allow more people access to them. And so I think in the end, the goal is, how do we really help, create a new form of transportation that people can use on an everyday basis, rather than just another product, that's only available for a very select few group of people.
Right. That's a very interesting way to look at it, because yes, helicopters pretty limited in terms of its market size right now. Noise is a very good point that you bring up. How many people can Midnight carry?
So we're building a piloted plus 4 passenger vehicle. And it was really critical. And from day one, we designed a vehicle that was could carry at least 1,000 pounds of payload. And so the challenge with these vehicles is, you design them around to fit an existing helicopter infrastructure. So the wingspan is limited, the weight is limited. And then you pick an energy, amount, and then you start building the vehicle. And what we quickly find out is there's not a lot of room for payload because, the batteries take up such a large percentage of the weight. And so it's actually very hard to build them and have payload. So we have spent a lot of time really focusing on making sure we could get that 1,000 pounds. We could really carry 4 passengers with us because it's important to making the business model work. So in order to have a lot of these vehicles, you will have to be economically viable. And so that was really one of the critical parts to our design from the beginning, was to build a vehicle that was, I'll call it, the least complex possible in order to enable certification, but also that can enable the business case, which was a piloted plus 4-passenger vehicle.
Right. Now, for each of these 4 passengers, what would it cost to begin with? And what do you foresee ultimately it will cost for this, let's say, this ride from New York to Manhattan?
So in the beginning, our goal is going to be to compete against rideshare prices. And so if you think about Manhattan to Newark or Manhattan to JFK, it's about a 15-mile-ish type of trip. And so if you took an Uber today, it would probably cost you around $100, maybe more. And so that's actually a pretty expensive trip on a per mile basis. So New York might be more expensive than another place like Miami, where the cost per mile is actually much lower. I think you can think about it as somewhere between $3 and $6 per passenger mile, where depending on the location to where you want to go.
That is very interesting. $100 sounds fantastic. I would have expected $300. Would you make money on something like that at $100 for carrying 4 passengers and 1,000-pound payload?
So a lot of the costs we understand today. So I know what the bill of materials cost to build these vehicles. I know what insurance costs. I know what pilots cost, but there are some costs that are unknown. So landing fees, as an example, I think is an expense that needs to be figured out. So, for example, there's not that many helicopters that land today at JFK or Newark, and so it's very expensive to land a helicopter there. That won't make sense for our model if we have to get charged the same prices. Now, that being said, if we are doing hundreds of takeoff and landings, you would imagine we could negotiate a much better deal. And so that's the kind of thing I think can happen. Also, when we land at a place like Newark, you also have the biggest customer, United, there at the table negotiating those prices with you. So it kind of gives you a different leverage than a helicopter operator that might have very limited, sort of economic impact, to that place. So, there are some that we know. Maintenance is another one. And so what would seem to be obvious and make sense is that these are much less complex vehicles. In our open house, we had our head of motor inverter out there describing the simplicity of the motors. And, one of the things he compared the motor to was he compared the electric motors we have to like a Cessna's, motor. And it's it's factors of like 20 in terms of like simplicity. So we'll have something like 6 moving parts in a motor versus a Cessna engine might have, 100 to 200 moving parts. And so they're much more simple vehicles that likely require much lower maintenance, which likely drives the cost down substantially. But until we have a fleet of them out there operating on everyday basis, it is harder to understand that.
Right. Volume is something you mentioned, right? So you use the volume and number of takeoffs and landings, number of people you're carrying per day to negotiate the prices down. Makes complete sense. But isn't that a catch-22? Because you have 4 seats on one of your aircraft, and yet a Boeing 777 coming in from London might have over 300 passengers on a United flight. How do you balance this? Because you can't carry all those passengers, or even all of the business class passengers coming in on United. What percentage of the passengers will actually fly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think in the beginning, it'll be limited. But as the products become more normalized and there's a lot more real estate that's dedicated at the airports to these vehicles, we can dramatically increase volumes. And so you will see it to be more limited in the beginning. I think what we need to really make sure is that for every passenger we take, the experience is incredible. And so it's low friction, it's very easy to use, and it's very convenient. And so I don't think in the beginning we'd even aim to serve everybody. It's just would be a very complex product. We want to make sure that the people we do serve will have just a phenomenal experience. If you can imagine, we have a city side, what we'll call vertiport, like takeoff and landing location. And if you can imagine, if you could even go through a TSA security check there where there's not very many people, and you can fly in behind the gate, right next to where your gate is. And now instead of showing up to the airport, right, 60 minutes or 120 minutes early, you can show up, right before 10 minutes before your flight's going to board, because you have predictability and being able to get there versus traffic. There's no predictability. And you fly in like right next to your gate. That's almost like flying private. That's an incredible experience. You're not only avoiding the trip to the airport, you're avoiding the entire airport. That's what's possible. And so, we're going to work towards, that, type of concept of operations. And the airlines want it. TSA wants it too, because it's a way for us to decongest traffic at the airports themselves. And so everybody really wins here in a product like that. So I think there are a lot of incredible opportunities, but we will have to start relatively small, make sure we can service, make sure it's a great opportunity, and then ultimately expand.
I like how you're thinking, or rather rethinking, passenger experience here, right? The last time I was at New York, I was there 3 hours earlier, and yet I barely made the flight, and it was super crowded. So absolutely, I would do anything to avoid the airport experience. But what's interesting is about a decade or so ago, I think airlines like Cathay Pacific launched their Hong Kong city check-in. Airlines like Fiji Airways now offer in-hotel check-in, so you can stay at the beach for longer before your night flight from Fiji to Los Angeles, for example. But you're saying you will be able to handle entire check-in for a passenger going from Manhattan to London on behalf of United in the city at your vertiport. Is that the goal?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the complexity of the system that gets set up. But it's funny you mentioned the check-in, because we can certainly check people into the sort of to the airline. But if you can imagine, or to our own airline, but if you can, almost like take a step back and look at it, if we had enough planes that were just flying, it would almost be more of like an air gondola, like a ski lift, rather than like your typical flight where you get assigned a seat and you get assigned a time, where it's basically you just show up and you just know it's either green or red. You can either show up and there's going to be space available, or there's not space available, and you just can hop on a plane and go. That's the ultimate vision, where it's really low friction. You just show up, you hop on. It's just these planes are all flying over in the air together, like in a line, like in a row, kind of landing down. That is really an incredible experience. I think that's really possible. But it's funny that you said, reinventing, how the whole process works and the check-in process. And so a lot of the airlines will tell you the actual check-in process at an airline doesn't do anything. It actually doesn't go anywhere. It's a leftover thing, legacy thing from back when we had paper tickets. Now it's much easier for them to understand, if you're there, if you're not there. And so there's not much of a benefit from doing that for the airline. So we can actually help reinvent how a lot of the processes work. And that's something that United's been very interested in, is thinking about the entire customer experience. How do we work together to make sure their best customers have a really incredible journey?
Wow. Very exciting. I'm getting so many ideas here around what can be done. Let's talk a little about battery. And yours is, of course, a fully electric aircraft. Battery technology is constantly evolving. Does the battery that will enable Midnight to do what it's intended to do in 2 to 3 years' time exist right now? If not, what's the roadmap like?
Yeah. So as part of our strategy, we wanted to make sure that from day one, we were building a plane that could be certified based on existing technologies. So we chose a battery that is off the shelf that you could get today. And so, we picked cylindrical cells. We've announced kind of the groups that we're working with. And we made sure that this was a strategy that we wouldn't get stuck waiting for some future battery to pass some test that hadn't been certified, that hadn't been used lots of times before. So we are using an existing cell provider for the existing cells. That being said, there are a lot of cells in the lab right now that are very interesting. And maybe by 24, 25, 26, these cells will be commercially ready. They'll be tested. They'll be able to pass certification. we are agnostic to the actual cell. We don't care. If there are better cells that come out, great. We will go get a supplemental type certificate and upgrade with better cells. And that means, because we have a certain amount of weight allocation that's added towards cells, that means that will provide either more payload, meaning we take more passengers, more luggage, more stuff, or we could fly further, or we could fly faster, or we could just use less batteries and lower the cost even further. So it's almost like we joke we're building the worst product we'll ever build today, because naturally the product just gets better because the key enablers that other groups are working on are just getting better every day.
Very interesting. I love the optimism and the positivity of the approach here. Given that you're building the worst possible product you're building today, are the current battery capabilities a constraint for your ambitions?
Not based on what we're trying to do today. So our whole concept was we're going to build a vehicle that can go up to 100 miles, but is focused on these 20 to 40 mile trips that we can do back to back in rapid succession. And with the charging time on the ground, that will be very minimal. So if we had to pick a 20-mile trip, your typical, Newark to Manhattan type of trip, we can charge that battery and re-top it off in the same amount of time that the passengers are loading and unloading, 10 minutes or less. And so it makes the experience great because we're getting the aircraft constantly used in the air, which ultimately, again, makes our shared cost base, over a greater group, which in turn leads to lower prices. So based on batteries today, we can fulfill all the missions we want to do. Now, what we can't do today is fly from, Manhattan to Philadelphia or Manhattan to Boston. That's too far. And so the regional routes are not on the table for what we're building today. In the future, that's possible as batteries get better. Again, if you can imagine, let's say we wanted to fly the same routes and carry the same payload, we could also just use much less batteries and lower the prices even further. And so that would be the goal, where you can imagine, we have now built, let's say, thousands of vehicles. We've gotten the cost of the vehicles down to something, call it $1 million or sub $1 million. We have, the infrastructure costs are relatively low because there's lots of landings. And all of a sudden we're using a lot less batteries because batteries are just better. And the cost of taking one of these vehicles is not only lower than rideshare, but almost equal to owning a car. Now, if you can drive costs down that far, now we're talking about a mass use product that can really scale. And so that's the goal. That's the ambition, is really to be able to, keep doing that. And so that's why there's this built-in tailwind we have to the industry from batteries just getting better.
I love how you're thinking about it. Are your ambitions limited to the US major metros? Are you thinking beyond the US as well?
We've started by focusing on the US because we want to make sure we actually get to market. It's super, we are probably the most focused company out there, right? Of saying one product, one market, get to market, very, very quickly. That being said, there is an incredible amount of opportunities to look internationally. And so I do think it's a global product, and I do think we will go global. I think we've started, just in the US, but I think you will, see us look at more international opportunities here.
Sure. One of the things that, of course, will come, I love the vision you paint, right? This is disrupting mass transportation is not just a niche product. Yet, if we look at if we go back to the rise of Airbnb or Uber or some of these technologies that did disrupt industries when it comes to consumers, there was a big perception barrier that had to be crossed. Have you done any sort of studies around people's comfort level about UAMs or eVTOLs, which seem like buzzwords right now, and what can be done to overcome if there are any objections there?
Yeah. One thing I think is actually helpful along those lines is sort of the, social media or Instagramming moments that you can create for people. The Midnight Plane is beautiful. It's an amazing design, and flying in a vehicle like that, I think, will be very attractive for people to want to show from a social status, social currency perspective. And so I do think it actually is very attractive to a certain group of people just to take a product like that. But I also did just see a study that was done at CES. So Tom Muniz, Archer COO, did a panel. And on the panel was a woman who, from the CES organization, had just done a large nationwide study. And one of her points was, there was, I think, 25% of the people surveyed said they were interested in trying an eVTOL right when it came out to market. And on one hand, you could say that sounds really low. Only 25%, 75% said, did not say they would. If 25% of America said they wanted to try an eVTOL, I mean, the amount of eVTOLs that would need to be created would surpass our ability for decades, probably. And so, I mean, it is just such a huge amount of folks that would want to try the vehicle. So I actually thought that was very encouraging. I also think when you put a United logo on the side of it, all of a sudden the safety question becomes much less of a thing and much more of a, you trust. The United brand stands for safety. And so, you don't really question, is that an A320? Is that a 737? Like what kind of plane? You're like, oh, it's a United plane. It's safe. And so that's how most, I think, Americans think about it. And so I do believe you will have way more demand than we could ever satisfy, any of us, if it's Archer or any of the competitors get to market too, for a very, the foreseeable future.
Yes, I think hopefully you will see more demand than you can handle. But I think it's important to differentiate the folks at CES are the guys who probably would have ordered a Tesla Cybertruck by now. So it's a very specific niche who would have probably said 25% in there. You mentioned credibility, and yes, United logo definitely will help. What about certifications and FAA and all of these new paths? How far along are you down this road, and what are some of the major hurdles to overcome?
Yeah, so you're right. From a credibility standpoint, I mean, I don't know if the kind of the general public understands the certification process and what that means. So we are certifying these vehicles at similar levels of commercial airliners. And so, I mean, very, very safe standards. It's not Archer saying these vehicles are safe. It's the FAA saying they're safe. And what you have to prove to the FAA that these vehicles are as safe as you say. And that's the whole process that we're going through. And so the good news is that you see the FAA publicly stating that this is a very important priority. And they have, Billy Nolan, the acting administrator, told us that what they call AAM, Advanced Air Mobility, which is what they call eVTOL, is a top 3 priority of the agency. And so it is a big strategic national priority to bring these vehicles to market. And I think that's because, there's such a huge opportunity here for America to show innovation in these vehicles and to make sure that the next great, aerospace company gets built in America. And so there's a big push behind that. It's bipartisan. It's across, all different groups. So everybody wants that to happen. So that's really good. Last year, you saw Billy Nolan go on 60 Minutes and publicly state, hey, we will be certifying these vehicles. So this is happening, which I think was another great sign of cooperation. Now, it's a hard process, right? Because there are thousands and thousands of tests and paper and documents that we have to get through. And that's what we're all working towards. And so we are very far along in that process. We are on track to certify these vehicles here by the end of 2024 and start operating in 2025. And so we are going to keep working really hard, but that is a very aggressive time frame that we are shooting towards. And it's going to be a process we have to work really closely with the FAA to actually get done. And so the good news is they want to do it. Now we have to actually go and do it and get done.
That is definitely encouraging. I do remember Billy and his comment there, and that was definitely encouraging. And I'm keen to see the momentum that you and Joby and Vesk and the others built. One of the things, I'm rethinking, imagining your air gondola service, people, flying back to back to back all the way from Manhattan to New York. But you need pilots. You need one pilot per plane or per aircraft. Where are you going to get these pilots? Will they be retrained? Will they be newly trained? What's the pilot plan here?
Yeah, actually, I would say probably more like 2 or 3 pilots per aircraft. These planes fly a lot, so they can't fly all day, all night, all weekend. So you need a lot of pilots per aircraft. The good news is that there's a lot of interest in trying to help rebuild the entire pilot community. And so there's a pretty big pilot shortage across the aviation industry. And here you have a new cool product that can help start to train new pilots and really encourage them to come in a product where they can sleep in their own beds, and meaning they're not flying all over the country, all over the world, and allow them to gain hours to where they can fly the bigger aircraft where they can have really great long careers. So United has stated they want to work with Archer, and I'm sure other companies as well, to really help rebuild the pilot pipeline. So they have a pilot school called Aviate, which they're already graduating, folks out of. And, that school, eventually will start hosting Archer, midnight modules where they will teach them how to fly the Archer planes. They will come out of that school into an Archer plane, work their way for several years. And so we can have this like broader, that's really the goal, is to have a broader plan like that where, we can not only just help train new pilots for Archer, but also just for the industry. So I think you have that's a really great way to think about it. Now, the second way to think about it is if you've ever, you'd have to be in a pretty interesting circumstance to have this happen, but if you've ever flown, a simulator for a helicopter, or if you've ever been in a helicopter, it is actually a very complicated vehicle to fly. These vehicles are actually very easy to fly. And so they use fly-by-wire software where you're effectively pointing, the stick in a direction and the computers are making the decisions and flying the plane. So within 5 minutes, I could teach you how to fly the plane very easily, versus it might take you a month to learn how to hover a helicopter. And so it is just a different experience. And so I think it lowers the sort of the barrier there for people to come in. And it could provide, a really great, opportunity for some folks to get re-excited about flying. And if you think about, the electrification of aviation, it's this new golden age that's come about that I think will actually really encourage a bunch of young folks to really get involved.
Right. This is very interesting. I love the angle that you mentioned there around pilots being able to sleep in their own bed. No more layovers, no more cross-country flying. You can go back home and be with your kids. Can be quite exciting to, people with growing kids, teenagers at home, for example, or young kids at home. Let's talk a little about competition here. You've got a competitor, Wisk, which is pilotless autonomous flight. You, of course, need pilots. You've got another one in Joby, which has taken the slow and steady approach compared to yours, which I would say is a fast and furious approach. Who do you think is going to be the big winner here?
I think the amazing thing about the industry is, there's so much potential demand for the product that there can be lots of groups that come in here and do really well. And so I really do hope Joby can get certified, gets to market. I hope other groups like Beta, which I think have really great products that can get certified and come to market. There's some great entrepreneurs out there building, good stuff. So I think you will see a range of products doing different things. I think the groups that get to market first will be piloted because the FAA has made it very clear that that is the path to market versus going autonomous. But I do think down the road, there will be an ability to certify an autonomous plane as well. So I think there's room for all different types of, of products over time. And so, today, it certainly looks like, Archer and Joby are leading the industry. We both have very significant certification progress and very significant technology progress. But I do think you will start to see other companies out there make progress as well. The challenge that the different groups have is capital. And so there's limited capital out there. It's a very expensive, product to build. And so, I think Archer was very fortunate to sort of seize the moment when capital was more abundant. And it put us in a position to, get really far and put us in a position to be an early mover. I think the early movers do get some advantage in the sense that, we can start to, build brand equity and brand loyalty, or build trust. We can partner with really great groups out there that want to get involved. And then, of course, the bigger companies tend to get more capital opportunities as well. And so, that can really help us just, increase the odds of success as we get closer to market.
Right. And hopefully the rising tide raises all the boats in your case, the first movers here. At the end of last year, you signed an agreement with the car giant Stellantis, where Stellantis will be manufacturing your eVTOLs in a Georgia facility. Talk us a little through that, and how much of an advantage does this kind of industrial muscle give you over competition?
Yeah, so Stellantis is the recent merger between Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot. It's the third largest auto OEM by revenue. So it's a huge group that makes millions and millions of cars with brands like Jeep, Ram, Maserati. And one of the, really interesting, things is the auto OEMs have figured out how to manufacture a lot of, pieces of hardware. And the established companies have been able to avoid getting stuck in sort of the production hell that we've seen a bunch of the new startups get stuck in, Tesla, Rivian, Lucid. And so you have basically a company that is very good at logistics. That's the autos. They take something from raw material into a finished delivered product in a very short period of time. And we have to do a very similar thing. Now, nobody has built, thousands of aircrafts that's like doing it right now. Basically, last time that happened was World War II. And so you have this company out here, in Stellantis that makes a lot of electric power systems now. They're building, electric powertrains. They use a lot of, composite parts, and the Jeep Grand Cherokees have composite roofs, and so they're used to scale. They understand supply chain. They understand securing assets for raw materials, and it's a really big, important partner for Archer. Now they're helping us with capital, with people, with know-how, with knowledge, IP, technology. It's a huge capital offset for Archer. So it's like hundreds of millions of dollars that we don't have to put into the business. And the, I'll call it increase in odds of success of being able to actually manufacture these vehicles. So interestingly, Carlos Tavares sat on the board of Airbus for 6 years. He just stepped off the board last year. So he's sat on he's the CEO of Stellantis, one of the largest auto companies, but he was also on the board of Airbus for 6 years. And so he's a very unique perspective into aerospace manufacturing and auto manufacturing. And so great partner for us. They're also a big capital provider. So they gave us the opportunity to, at any time, effectively anytime we want. There are some milestones in there, but stuff that's all within our normal time kind of plan, where we can effectively sell them up to $150 million of Archer stock at our discretion. So if we need the money, there's money there. If we don't have to take it. But it gave us even additional flexibility in making sure that we can get to market. And so huge partner for us, fantastic group to work with, very, very smart engineers that are helping us really from thinking about the whole spectrum from raw material to ultimately finished delivered good.
Right. This is, I think, quite visionary, because now you're thinking scale. Thinking about scale, what comes after Midnight? Midnight is just when you're getting started. Do you have plans for larger aircraft, smaller aircraft, international markets? What's next?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did, one of our go-to-market strategies was to build a vehicle that could be certified from day one. And so we left out a lot of the things we're so tempted to do, 3D printing or vertically integrating a lot of the parts. So I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit we can go back and get. So if you think about like what, Tesla did, they took like their powertrain and shoved it into the Lotus, sort of the Lotus, Lotus chassis. Yeah. And all of a sudden, they had this great part. And then they built the Model S, which was like a 10x better product. And so I think there's an opportunity here to build an even better vehicle over time and really upgrade a lot of this, a lot of what we're doing. And that was very strategic and very, very much on purpose, because we need to make sure we just get to market. Like that's been the main, kind of a drive of the whole company. So I do think there's really great opportunities to build an even better plane right after, we launch Midnight. So that's one. And then I think over time, what, I'm hopeful for, without mentioning a specific product, is, look, for a long time, nobody's challenged big aerospace. It's just a duopoly that's just kind of, been around. And while, there have been new planes that have been announced, they are basically incremental in terms of development. And so the plane that you ride on today is not much of a different experience than the plane that, our parents took when they were kids. And so there hasn't been very much in terms of gains. And so I do think the eVTOL industry will ignite sort of the innovation across aerospace in general. You'll start to see better products come out because there's all of a sudden new competitors, and it's forcing, the industry to really start to think differently and to invest. And I think that's what's going to be a really big deal. And I think Archer will take place in that too.
I'm really impressed, Adam, by a few things. One, how you're thinking about piloting this, hand in hand with United brings the credibility, how you're approaching certification here, how you're thinking scale in this partnership around, get a car manufacturer to build this thing. How lateral is that? What struck me when I was researching this interview was you actually have no aviation background compared to, let's say, the Wisk CEO, who's a Boeing veteran now, the new Wisk CEO, right? You have no aviation background. You have not scaled a company this large so quickly previously. What makes you perfect for this role?
After I sold my last company, I had a chance to really take a step back and think about how do I build a company that can have impact. And the kind of vision of looking at the eVTOL industry really was I took a very differentiated approach with Archer than everything else that was being built. And so the whole industry at the time when I was looking at it was very much focused on R&D. And most of the companies were building really cool R&D products. And Archer was the first company to come out there and say, we're going to actually commercialize. We're going to put the pencils down. We're going to not do crazy stuff like 3D printing or autonomous only. We're going to build a product that can be certified. So our whole vision was, let's go and build a vehicle that can get to market right away. And I think that really ignited the whole industry. We were the first ones to go out there and take the company public, and then there was a slew of companies that came after us to do it, and it brought a bunch of capital into the space. And so, what I think what's really important is sort of a collection of my experiences in being able to build and scale a company, which I did at my last one, being able to raise enough capital in order to accomplish something that's very, very hard, and to be able to inspire the industry to change from saying it's time to stop doing R&D projects and time to start commercializing. That was the recipe that I brought to the industry that I think really helped move it forward. But the reality is there are some really great leaders out there that are doing amazing things that I look up to and think I have a lot of respect for. And so I do just feel lucky just to be here, as part of this industry. And, I think as probably a lot of people you would hear say, there's a lot of things that have gone right to get me to where I am here today. And I'm very fortunate for the incredible team that I have around me. I mean, my COO and Tom Muniz is engineer number one in the whole space. My chief engineer, Jeff Bauer, he's the former chief engineer at Airbus Vahana. I mean, these are some incredible people that have built amazing things that are helping us get here today. So it's certainly a team effort.
Glad to hear that. Now, the last part of this podcast is a rapid fire round in which people who do not know you personally do get to know you a little personally. And, the simple questions, hopefully you can answer off the cuff. Simple things like, what's your favorite movie?
I love Interstellar. I like thinking about, and it's the way I think about Archer. I want to build the world I want to live in. And that was I love sci-fi movies, and that movie really, gets me thinking.
Do you have a bookshelf that often shakes with books shaking, and does it bring you back to the book, to the movie?
Well, when I think about books, I often tend to read books that help me shift my frame of thinking. And one that I did read that put me there was the Elon Musk book by Ashley Vance. And the reason that I connected with that book so well was not because of all the impressive things that Elon's done, which obviously he's done incredible things, but the struggles that he went through, because the entrepreneur journey is full of struggle, and everybody feels like their story is so much harder than everybody else's, and everything's not fair, and why is this so hard, and everybody else has it so easy. But when you really start to read other people's stories, you see how hard it is for everybody. And so it really helped me connect with that sense of, hey, I'm not alone in this. We're actually a bunch of us are in this together. They might not necessarily be working with us, but it is a very hard journey. So I really connected with that book.
Oh, yes. It's one of my favorite books as well. And I still remember, I think it was Christmas Eve when they were out of funds to pay salaries on New Year's Day, and how they managed to pull that together. Here we have Tesla, of course. What about your favorite city?
New York City. Greatest city in the world.
Are you born and brought up there?
I was born in Florida, lived in New York for 20 years.
There you go. That explains it. What about your favorite airline?
United, of course.
No, it cannot be United, please. This is a loaded question.
I don't know if you've been on a United flight, but at the seat back of every United plane, they play a 37-second Archer commercial. So what could be better than that?
I've not seen that yet. I flew United last summer, but I got to fly them again soon enough for the Archer commercial. I do have, by the way, I have the United app, and on the app they have this game where you can land planes like an air traffic controller, and they do have a boom and an Archer aircraft there, if I'm not wrong.
Yep, that's right. My kids have wasted a lot of hours playing that game on flights.
My highest score is 724. Check with your kids how high they go.
All right.
What about something that you want to learn?
Something I want to learn. I am go. So, maybe I'll take the opposite side of that. Meditation.
Okay. Is that something you're into or you want to get into?
I want to get into.
Fantastic. We shall talk offline about that afterwards. Who do you look up to?
I'd say my father. My father is a really smart man with a great background, but he's been successful and really been able to find peace in his life. And he lives just an amazing life and relatively simple life, but an amazing life. And I really look up to that.
Fantastic. Is it still in Florida?
Still in Florida.
Love it. And finally, what is the best advice you've received?
One of my old bosses: follow the research wherever it takes you. And so, if you can trust the data and you don't listen to general perception, and you do truly follow the research, it can show you amazing things. And so, this guy that I used to work for, he said, "I'm going to show you how the world works," and he was right. And a lot of that I did apply to thinking about eVTOL. And when I thought about this industry, I saw a product that was, the technology had really evolved, the key enablers, the batteries were ready, to build a product, the regulatory environment was set up. And, even though it sounded crazy, and it sounded crazy because it was nicknamed flying cars, it really actually wasn't very crazy. It was super doable. And so that guidance has been a really good one. It's, follow the research, trust the data.
Wow, fantastic. Glad to know. Adam, thank you very much for opening up, sharing your perspectives on what's turning out to be a very, very exciting field. And I wish you and Archer all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Awareness is the key to a green future, so please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing us with your network or leaving a review. For more information on how aircraft emissions data can help you reach your sustainability goals, visit Cirium from the link in the show notes. You can start a conversation with us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.